and welcome to Sports by Compian. My name is Steven Compian. I'm not joined here by my normal co-host Corey Compian. We've been having some things getting this podcast off the ground here, and I decided to take matters into my own hands today to go ahead and get some more episodes out. Um, Episode 6 was lost and gone to us forever, due to technical difficulties during the recording of said episode where we actually had Manny Bogle on, another brother of ours, and we talked a little Vikings football about how Kirk Cousins is a beautiful person, but maybe not the best quarterback, and we also went into depth about a signing that the Cowboys had of some backup running back that Corey wanted to break down for us, so that was awfully nice of him. We also talked a little rugby, which got lost in the shuffle there, and which I will now reiterate here in this episode 7. That's right, we are not going to record episode 6. It was lost and gone forever. You will never know about it. Moving on now to episode 6, which is going to be, episode 7, which is going to be a beautiful, beautiful episode. I wanted to start with what we talked about in episode 6. It didn't get quite recorded, but will be re-recorded today. And that is the HSBC Sevens World Sevens Series that is going on in Singapore. It took place during this lovely month of April. And we're going to go ahead and go over some stats of it. Full disclosure, I did not watch all of these games. For some reason, I watched most of the pool play and some of the quarterfinals and missed most of the actual finals and semifinals action. But we're going to go ahead and review it all right now, and we'll let you know what we all thought. So first of all, I saw the Japan versus France game, and there's a lot to say for France's young team that is up and coming. They definitely look like they're a lot smaller out there than the French boys. But even more so than that, the French just have a beautiful way of playing rugby right now, both on their 15s team and their 7s team, which is just a very fast team, and they get the ball around really well, constant distribution, excellent tackling. The Japanese didn't have much of a chance, although they did have some excellent plays and did get some good ball movement. As you can see here, they got a little 14-pointer, and it was a 36-14 game for that first one. The next game was actually an historic game as Ireland got their first win over Fiji in sevens ever. And that is due to a young Irish team that really brought it, man. These guys have been playing fast rugby. They have this gentleman who, Connor, the number 7. He was on Dancing with the Stars, and he gave us a couple of little jiggies out there while he was playing some rugby in Singapore. He had 2 tries in the first half and put Ireland up 14-0 before Fiji even knew what was going on. But they did respond in the second half, and you see why Fiji is one of the most dangerous sevens team you'll see out there on the pitch because they quickly put up 12 points. However, Ireland was able to close out that first game at 21-12 with a late try to end the game out. Wales went to bat with Ireland, and this was a good game to watch because we saw Scotland, actually go down early to Wales. Wales was up 14-0 on this one pretty quickly. Just due to good ball movement, some broken tackles by the Scottish. It's hard to make tackles in sevens, man. You miss one little tackle, you miss the guy the wrong way, he is gone. It is very unlikely your teammates are going to catch that guy. And it's just all about coordination and talking to your teammates and no lazy defense whatsoever because you will get burnt. As the Welsh found out in the second half, whenever the Scottish suddenly started finding their big Scotsman on the flank there, and his name eludes me right now, but a very big lad. The dude had 4 tries in this game. It was pretty insane. So literally 4 tries on the day for Edmonds, I believe it is. I think he was wearing the number 1. Utter beast of a man, and very fast too, because he put up a good 4 tries for Scotland and got them the win over Wales. Argentina went to bat against New Zealand, and now this was New Zealand's first reappearance on the sevens stage since COVID. So they have not been around for sevens this series much, and so this was their first time back on the pitch. They actually beat a very good Argentinian team that really brought it, played within themselves, but just were not quite up to the task of playing a fresh New Zealand team that was looking to establish themselves in this 7th series because they haven't been able to. After that, we were followed by a good game between England and Spain. England just kept good possession of the ball, minimized the penalties, and drove down there, and ultimately beat Spain. Spain did a good job of with their normal offloads. They have some good players on their team, but ultimately couldn't quite keep up with England today, and fell 19-14. Australia came onto the pitch, and at first it was looking a little questionable against the Samoans, who actually brought quite a game to against the Irish. I mean, sorry, against the Aussies. The Samoa played their little hearts out. Were up a couple times, and due to their number 6 plowing through a couple Australians and getting a score there, they were looking pretty good. But ultimately, the Australian speed and the Australian support just was too much for Samoa, and they ended up falling 26-17. The U.S. took on Kenya, and this was obviously an important game for me as someone who likes to see the U.S. rugby grow. Sevens rugby is something that the U.S. does well. They don't do well with 15s yet, but their sevens team is one of the best in the world. So I wanted to make sure they did well in this. They produced. They had a close game with Kenya, who, granted, Kenya is a very good team. They had a couple of pitfalls in this series, but ultimately they are a fast, physical team that kept pace with the United States, and it was a great game to watch. Really, this score of 12-10 would have been tied up by Kenya, who got a late try, but they did miss their extra point, let the U.S. hang on and win by 12-10. So big win there for the USA in pool phase. South Africa. These guys have been absolutely dominating the Sevens series these last couple of years. I believe they were looking for something like an 8th win in a row, and they found it here against Canada, who just could not quite keep up with the power, the speed that the South African team can produce. One of their best, shout out to, I think they're number 9, which is absolutely the best hair I've seen in rugby so far. That shit was amazing. That said, Canada has a substitute player they brought on who looks like Theo Von. I don't know if you guys know that comic, but he looks exactly like Theo Von. Hell of a mullet on this kid. Good tackling, and he had a couple errors on a separate game. But either way, shout out to that kid with a good mullet, and shout out to the South African dude with just the most amazing hair ever. But they absolutely dominated Canada, 31-5. Now, I actually did not see this next pool phase game, but Fiji took it to France and won 26-19. I think that was pretty huge for later on getting into the qualifiers for Fiji, because if they would have lost that one, they would not have made it out of the pool phase. Ireland absolutely took it to poor little Japan with a 38-7 win. Once again, I did not see this game, but going off of what we saw, Ireland came to play this series, and they really brought it down there in Singapore. They don't have necessarily big players. They just have players who it seems like get around, know what they're doing, they're fast. Their number 7, like I said, is on Dancing with the Stars. He can move, that kid, and he's obviously making great plays out there. Shout out to Japan, though, always growing their rugby team, and they're always fierce little competitors. Scotland went down against New Zealand, no shame in that, especially at a 19-7 game. I would have to imagine that Australia just has that fast speed. It's just too much, quite, for a lot of teams to contend with. Argentina absolutely mauled Scotland. Well, I shouldn't say absolutely mauled, but they did get a victory over the Welsh, 24-7 affair. England fell to Samoa at a 31-5 affair, which would probably surprise some people. Samoa has been actually bringing it quite a bit this tournament. As I mentioned up here, they had a pretty close game against Australia, so maybe not absolutely surprising to see them take out England 31-5, but that pretty much eliminated England from any chance of moving forward in this series. Australia took out Spain 28-12, and now the Spanish were still looking for their first win in this series. It did not come against the Aussies. U.S. absolutely dominated Canada 33-12. Once again, not one of the games I saw. But the Canadians, they have a couple guys there. I believe they have another guy with a podcast even. Beautiful mustache on that gentleman. Shout out to his podcast. I forget the exact name. But, yeah, good for him. Cool dude, but their Canadian team is still growing. They're young lads. Then we have South Africa beat Kenya 26-5, which I did not see that game. You never know what's good teams like South Africa. They can get on a roll, and it's just hard to come back from. And to round out that pool phase for the Fijians, they absolutely dismantled Japan by far the farthest margin in the whole tournament by 62-0 against the young Japanese. Ireland went down on a very close game against the French with a 5-12 score. I can only imagine though that the French continue to play their excellent brand of defense and just manage to get a couple breakaways. That's all it takes in sevens. New Zealand took away Wales ability to win this game, and they completely smothered them 43-5. We have Argentina went ahead and took a win against Scotland in pool phase as well. Scotland put up 14 points, but it was not enough to counteract the 29 points from Argentina. Once again, the Spanish were not able to find a victory during this series as they lost to Samoa 14-26. Samoa gaining a 2-1 record during pool phase. Good for them. Now, moving on to more pool phase, actually. I'm sorry. Australia beat England, and this was quite an embarrassment for the English team. If you're an England fan, you could not have been too happy with the English performance over there in Singapore. They went down 40-0 against the Aussies. Kenya took out Canada 24-7. Not the worst showing for Canada. That was actually one of the games I actually had the pleasure of seeing. I just thought that the Canadians were just outmatched. These Kenyans were counter-rucking in some situations, but ultimately they have speed, they're physical, they have old veterans who know what they're doing. Then, in a very excellent game, which I am disappointed I missed, the U.S. beat South Africa 12-7. This was I saw that Argentina-Scotland game. And that game, Argentina just kind of ran it, man. It's hard to say because they kind of just run their system that they do. And the Scottish had a lot of errors that game, if I'm remembering correctly. With the Samoa-Spanish game, I also saw that one, and I want to say it just came down to Samoa getting their kicks in, being a little bit more savvy, and just haven't been around with sevens longer. I watched that a couple days ago. I'm not going to be able to give you guys the exacts on it, but this was also some good rugby, guys. Some fantastic rugby. It could be watched on the Peacock. It's all still there. Lots of good information there about the growing sport of rugby. South Africa fell to the U.S. 12-7 in pool phase, and that was huge. Moving into the quarterfinal phase, England went down to Wales 19-24. Once again, if you are an English fan, this had to have been a disappointing series for you here in Singapore. That said, the Welsh managed to pull out a victory as they leave the Singapore. They could not have been. They must have been pretty happy with that. And the France just goes ahead and close out the French 40-12. I did actually see that game. And once again, this was just the French overpowering a team that is still young, still growing. The Canadians were scrappy, but they just could not hang with France ultimately as they continued to find each other for offloads, as they continued to try and find each other with support, beautiful passes. Canada struggled to maintain possession in that game. Then we went over to Scotland and Spain. This game seemed a lot closer early, with once again Mr. Edmonds, the number one for Scotland, getting on the board and getting a try for Scotland. But it was ultimately underwhelmed by a Spanish team that did an excellent job of maintaining possession, making Scotland pay for their mistakes, which they had a lot of, and ultimately coming away with a 27-10 victory and getting their first win down there in Singapore. So good for Spain. They must be happy. Then you had Kenya actually pull out a very close victory against Japan, which is a great stat for Japan. They needed some type of good things to lean on after this, and I did watch this game actually. You would have expected the Kenyans to run away with this, but they did not do that. Japan hung in the pocket, played some tough rugby, and they ultimately kept it close. A 12-10 affair for Kenya. Next, we had Argentina and Australia. I did see this game as well, and ultimately it just came down to Australian rugby is beautiful right now, and they were just moving the ball with efficiency. Argentina could not hang. Gonzalez, their I think number 10 for the Aussies, was just all over the field, getting some perfect offloads, some great kicks as well. Argentina just could not hang with a 29-5 affair. Then one of the main beautiful game. I'm sorry I missed this one. Might go back and watch it even. The Fiji versus South Africa 1914 affair. Those are some of the best rugby teams in sevens. So I'm sure that was a great game to watch. New Zealand and Samoa. New Zealand coming away with a 22-14 win over Samoa. This is actually a tightly contested game and one of the closer games we've seen New Zealand in. Which is interesting because they hadn't really... Okay, they played Wales too and absolutely destroyed them. All right, fair enough. So I got New Zealand and Australia mixed up earlier. My bad, guys. Anyway, so then Ireland went ahead and took out our boys from the U.S. in a 14-12 affair. It looks like maybe a mix kicked by U.S. or something like that. Either way, good for Ireland. Really showing up here in Singapore. England went ahead and beat Canada for the 13th place match. I'm not sure what that's about. But yeah, 22-7 affair over Canada, who was, I think, still looking for their first victory there in Singapore. Tough day for them. Then we went over to Scotland versus Japan, and we see Japan pull off a victory. I'm not sure they had any other wins during Singapore, so good for them. Beating Scotland 24-21. Ultimately disappointing for Scotland that started off this tournament kind of strong, fell off quite a bit. The Welsh fell to the French 12-38. Once again, that is just some French power. I think only the Samoans and maybe the Fijians managed to beat France. France had a good showing here in Singapore. Spain went ahead and rallied and beat Kenya. Good for them. That is 2 wins in a row for the Spanish, who will go away quite happy from Singapore if I had to guess, especially beating a solid Kenyan team who might be asking some questions to themselves about how Singapore went. Argentina rallied from their defeat to Australia and took it to South Africa, who cannot be happy with the way this whole tournament turned out for them in Singapore. They were coming in as the number 1 in this tournament, and they fall in a 5th place match and could end up at 6 or 7 overall for this tournament. Quite disappointing for them. The U.S. rally after their defeat from Ireland and beat Samoa 24-17. Good for the U.S., putting up a good showing. We got Australia and Fiji. Australians actually fell to Austria in the semifinals, which is amazing. And this is how Fiji did it, 19-17 national fair. Good for them. We had Ireland go ahead and fall to New Zealand in a 19-22 affair. Good for New Zealand, just barely getting back into the sevens tournament. Once again, their first appearance since COVID, and they would go ahead and find themselves in the final against Fiji. More games over here. We had England go ahead and beat out Japan 28-14, so slightly better finishing there for England. France, once again, displaying their dominance with a 24-19 victory over Spain, but that is actually a very close score for Spain. Good for them. Kept it close. Really rallied in this tournament. They were not looking good when this all first started. A little crazy to see France only end up that far down there. It shows you what one defeat could turn to. Ooh, look at this. The U.S. fell quite a bit to Argentina. Could not hang with these boys. It was a 42-24 affair. The U.S. Rugby falls in the 5th place match. So they will probably end up as 6th place for that tournament, I guess. Then, in the bronze match, for 3rd place, we have Ireland fell to Australia ultimately, but good showing for Ireland. They'll pull in a 4th place medal there, and, I'm sure they would have definitely liked to win this game against Australia, but, Australia did rally and keep their veteran, and make sure they came in with at least bronze in all this. Who beat them again? Fiji, that's right. All right, and then Fiji actually goes on to win this tournament, so good for Fiji. Really showed up, and they won a 28-17 affair over New Zealand. So, you can really shout out the Fijians who rallied from an early defeat to Ireland to go ahead and win this tournament. So, great for them. The series does continue in the next city, which I believe will be Dubai in September. So, but as of now, it has wrapped up the HBC Sevens here. So moving on to some Major League Rugby commentary. I watched a game between the Seattle Seawolves right here, who are currently at number 3 against Rugby New York. This was actually back in round 7. Once again, Sports by Compian does not claim to be up to date on any of this. We just want to give you some analysis and maybe some amusement. And this one is mostly analysis because I don't have anybody to bounce any amusement off of. Future episodes it may be. But anyway, we had New York Rugby versus, who was I saying? Oh yeah, Seattle Seawolves. This was a 21-0 game at one point, guys. Seattle Seawolves were just absolutely dominating the game. This was a home game for them. The crowd was in it. They were keeping their forwards involved, just continuing to pound. Their number 14 comes flying through a gap on a line out and takes a beautiful line, runs over one guy, makes the other one miss, and puts this game out at 14-0. They went ahead and put in another one from their big number 8, who's also their captain. And he put them up 21-0. New York comes storming back on these guys. At one point, it was 13-21. It was quite a struggle, and people were thinking maybe Seattle's going to hang on to win this. Nope, New York gets a line out right down inside the 20, bring it down, executed perfectly, and just proceeded to run over the Seattle Seawolves, who could not contend with the maul. That maul led right into the try zone. New York ties it up. More penalties continue for Seattle. That had lots of penalties throughout this game. They went ahead and gave a penalty to New York within kicking range, and their kicker did not miss. This guy put it through the uprights. 23-21, only about a minute left. Seattle was not able to retain possession. The New York defense was stellar throughout this game. Good for them. Really locked down Seattle in that second half. They could not get anything going. And it ultimately led to a 23-21 victory for New York, one that they absolutely needed. As you can see here by the standings, they're 6-4 win record. So all these wins are huge. You can't lose them too much. It's all right in the thick of it. This is all very close in Conference West and East. Another game we saw more recently was in round 10. It was the San Diego Legion, who were at the time were number 2, going against the Austin Wranglers, who are still number 1. This game was once again one of those things that you saw the home team just absolutely dominating for a while there. San Diego was up, I believe, 14-0 at one point, but Austin stayed in it. They just were struggling to maintain possession. Lots of penalties in the early going for Austin, which really let San Diego maintain their good offense here on the field. They just continued to pound the ball and find the small openings in the Austin defense that continued to make mistakes, continued to draw penalties, and ultimately not keep possession of the ball. However, after about the first hydration break, Austin really started to bring this game back into focus, really started to score a couple tries, bring it in a lot more. I forget the exact scoring of it, but ultimately Austin ended up pulling ahead about 36-15 or so. Let me check on that final score. Which, by the way, guys, Major League Rugby, the network, is absolutely free. It is called therugbynetwork.com, and it is free to watch any Major League Rugby game from both all this season as well as last season. It's all on there, available to watch. Anyway, Austin absolutely pulled away in this game, 35-21. Once again, one of those things where you just did not see San Diego have any type of offense towards that second half there. Austin is actually the number 1 defense, ranked as highish as one of the number 1 defenses. They had about probably 100 more tackles than San Diego at one point in the game, because San Diego just was doing such a good job of keeping possession. But ultimately, San Diego was having a hard time scoring. They're big boys. They're big Samoans. They have some ex-New Zealand guys on there. Just were struggling to find the gaps, and Austin's defense was not relenting. They weren't missing a lot of tackles. They weren't making a lot of mistakes there. And their hooker, Matt Roach, I don't know his first name actually, but I believe his name is Roach, just had a really good game for Austin and ended up with 2 tries, put them ahead, and they never looked back. 35-21 victory over your San Diego Legion. Once again, guys, I'm trying to support U.S. rugby as much as possible. I believe it's a beautiful sport. I played football most of my life, and have switched over to rugby in college, and I just love the culture. I love the sport. I think it keeps you active. I think there's a lot of cool stuff going on with it. So yeah, I enjoy watching it, and Sports by Compian will try to have a lot of it, covered here in the future. I did want to leave you guys with just a reminder that you're all awesome, and that you should just continue to kick ass and such, because even if you can't get people to hop onto your podcast with you, just record that shit anyway. Fuck it. But on a serious note, boys and girls, thank you for listening to Sports by Compian. We did have some commentary about the U.S. New Zealand game, which happened back last year in November. We'll go ahead and leave you guys with that. I mean, there's not much to say about it. There was a documentary that came out. It was pretty cool. It talked about, the growth of the sport here in the U.S. and how some Aussies, New Zealand, and a lot of the really great rugby countries around the world know that the U.S. is sort of a sleeping giant. I mean, some of the best athletes in the world come out of this country, but, What's happening right now is they're all going to football, they're all going to baseball, they're going to basketball, they're going to things where they're going to make millions of dollars, and it's hard to blame them. I think Major League Rugby, most of those guys have a day job. So as it stands right now, they're not going to make a lot of money doing it. But you're seeing some of the, a lot of the other guys who doesn't quite work out with football like me. Obviously, a lot more talented, who drifted to rugby, and that's a lot of the guys you're finding on this U.S. Eagles team. I was playing 15s. A lot of guys, 28, 29 years old, picking up rugby in the last 4 or 5 years. The problem with that is you're going against New Zealand guys who have been playing this since they were 4 or 5. They've been playing touch rugby since we've been maybe throwing around a football or thinking about throwing around a football. So that obviously shows up on game day. And, you're just talking to these guys who have day jobs, respect the sport, love it, like the idea of it. They have their wing get on there and talk. This James something or another guy. He was just talking about how, he's better than both cultures, from football and rugby, and obviously it's up to everyone and each individual person. But him personally, he did much rather the rugby culture. Found it much more appealing to him. I found the same thing. It's been a much better culture for me. Anyway, all that to say, when they were out there listening to the haka, which is the New Zealand big old chant that they do before each game, which is actually a sign of respect to their opponent. It's sort of like respect dance of some sort that they do before all their games to let their opponent know that they're coming to kick their ass. But it was really cool watching the U.S. rugby guys just kind of sit over there and absorb that whole thing. Obviously, I think the U.S. rugby team wanted a better result, as did we, than 102 to 14. That is triple digits that happened last year when New Zealand came to play the U.S. rugby team. However, those 14 points are the first 2 tries ever by a U.S. rugby team against New Zealand. So it's not all shadows and bad times, but ultimately we want to do better than letting up 102 points. I think the U.S. should be known for tackling. Like, come on, guys. A couple of those early highlights would just look like hands. It was just hands. Like, literally the opening kickoff from New Zealand was just hands. Just quick ball movement, and the U.S. boys just couldn't keep up, and you miss one tackle against these guys. They're going to take it home for a try. Anyway, guys, all that to say, rugby's awesome. We might talk about a couple other things, as this show continues. We're in the early going of it, though, and football season is not here, so we're going to be talking about other stuff. I know I was foreign with hockey. I want to get in more on it. There's supposed to be another host that's coming in on here. We're supposed to talk to you guys a little bit about MMA. It's all in the works. It all could happen. Either way, stay tuned. Sports by Compian, coming at you live. Great show, great times. Talk to you guys soon. Oh, before I go, wanted to go ahead and shout out our non-sponsor sponsors. Today's non-sponsor sponsor is Dum Dum Pop. You know and love them. They are the pops that you pop into your mouth. No gum in there. They ain't going to give you gum. This isn't a gum type of lollipop. This is just a fruity, fun little trip. What am I going to get? Oh my God. Who wants the root beer Dum Dum Pop? Nobody. Cool. Either way, they are a great candy company. I've been making candy since I was a little schmuck, I'm sure, well before that as well. And they are a happy sponsor of Sports by Compian. Well, non-sponsor sponsor, but they should definitely sponsor us. Do it, Dum Dum Pop. Do it. All right, guys. Take care. Thank you for listening, and go out there and dominate your day today.